All right, good morning, everyone. Whoops. Good morning, John. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Monday, November the 2nd. Yeah, so I think we've got like a month of class left, and that's it. That's like 20, that's less than 20 classes.
Are you excited?
A little bit. A little bit. I like my holidays. It's Christmas. So everyone, you know, everyone likes their holidays, and I like mine too. But that said, I do like my job as well. So it's not like it's not like this is me. Oh God, 4 more weeks of this. It's not like that. For online people, hello, and also you might notice that I forgot my microphone this morning because I was using it on the weekend. So if the sound is not great, let me know. I'll try to speak loud enough so that you can hear me, but just in case, if you don't hear me, let me know, and I'll yell at the computer. So who's here? Lots of people are here. So Sala's here. Good morning to you. And Adel's here. Hello. Amy's here. Hello, Amy. Good evening to you, Daniel. Good morning, Mike. Hello, John. Hello, George. Good morning, Clara. Vicky's here. Hello, Vicky. And Gabrielle's here. Hello, Gabrielle. Shamimu's here. Hello to you. And Miles is here. Good morning, Miles. And Miles is here again. Good morning. Okay. So on Friday, we were still talking about sexism as a form of oppression, and we had we had talked about kind of the issue of women's suffrage, right? Women gaining the right to vote. And we talked about how that process of women gaining the right to vote actually had, there was a number of different things that we should remember about oppression that we could see in this example, right? And so I gave you these 4 elements of oppression, that oppression was historical and ideological and institutional and cultural, right? And so I said that in terms of oppression being historical, the idea here is that oppression works in terms of the way that societies are built, right? In terms of their socialized norms and values and beliefs and procedures, but also their legal and political structure as well. And so I kind of tried to make the point on Friday that even if tomorrow we had an election in Canada and we elected all women representatives, they would still be operating in a governmental system that was created for and by men. And so it would take them some time to create a government system that was kind of more reflective of both men and women. They could do it, right? And it can be done. It takes a lot of work, but it's possible. It's possible, but again, just electing women to government isn't the only thing that you would need to do, right? There would be a lot of social and political and legal change that would have to happen to create a system that was more equitable for both, right? So definitely getting women elected is an important step, but it's not the last step, right? It's just one step. We said that oppression was We said that oppression was ideological, right? And we said ideologies were kind of the big ideas that exist in society that are very difficult to not believe, because we see them reflected in all of our media, in all of our social institutions, and it's very easy to believe that this is the way things are, or this is the sort of natural way of things. But in fact, they're not. They're just simply ideas that we've come to believe and are reflected everywhere, right? So ideas like meritocracy, right? The idea that people who have lots of money or success, that it's all due to their own effort, right? And again, that's partly true. Like if you want to be, a cardiac surgeon, you're not going to get there without doing work, right? It's going to be a lot of work to train yourself to be able to become that. But there are other factors that are part of your success as well, parts that you cannot control, right? Maybe it's more likely that you'll become a cardiac surgeon if you come from a wealthy family, because med school is super expensive, right? And so if you're born into an upper economic class, then that's going to be easier for you, right? It might be easier for you if you're a man, right? So medicine might be, particularly surgery, might be a bit of a man's world. It might be more difficult for you to succeed as a woman cardiac surgeon, right? So you might have an advantage if you're a man. So again, meritocracy says that people's success is only due to their efforts, and if you're not successful, then you're not working hard enough. And again, there's a grain of truth to that, but it's not entirely true. The same thing with, I won't talk about individualism right now. So again, ideology plays a powerful role in oppression because it kind of normalizes things and sort of tells us that the way things are the way things either should be or the way that they must be, right? So, you know, there's, of course we have a meritocracy, because otherwise, you know, if we didn't, then nobody would work for anything and we'd all just be sitting on the couch, right? So you have to make it so that if people don't work hard, they're not successful, right? You have to have that idea, otherwise nobody would do anything, right? And so some of those, we'll talk about this a little later, but some of these ideas come out when you start talking about, have you heard about guaranteed income? Have you ever heard anyone talk about that? The idea that in society, so in Canada, there is an idea that we could have a guaranteed national income, I think it's called. And so every person in Canada would be guaranteed to make, let's say, $25,000 a year. So wherever the poverty line is, that's where we set it. And everyone is guaranteed to make that. If you don't have a job or you can't get a job, the government will send you $25,000 a year. If you do have a job, it will just get deducted from your taxes. So someone like me who makes more than $25,000 a year, I make 27, no, I'm just kidding. But somebody makes more than $25,000 a year, they wouldn't get any money. It would just be like worked in their taxes sort of thing. But if you made less, the government would top you up, okay? And so some people think this is a great idea because it raises everybody above the poverty line. It gives people the money they need to get the basic things they need to survive, like food and shelter and clothing. Some people disagree because some people believe in meritocracy, right? That if you gave everybody what they need to live, then nobody will work. Everyone will just sit around and collect their guaranteed national income, right? We'll get to that a little bit later. But again, ideology sort of convinces us that the way things is natural and normal, or maybe even keeps us from questioning it altogether. And so again, when we went to North Shore High School with Katie and Mean Girls, we knew who the popular kids were, and we didn't really question the fact of why they were popular in the first place, right? We kind of instinctively knew that the plastics are going to be at the top of the social hierarchy, right? And even when they were awful to people, which they were, we still didn't question it because we know that that's where they're kind of supposed to be, right? There's this ideology that, you know, the popular, pretty people, or the people who are pretty and rich and fashionable are at the top of that social order, right? If it was the band geeks, if we watched that movie and the band geeks were somehow at the top of the social hierarchy and everyone was, you know, bowing down to them, it would be weird, right? You would look at it and you'd be like, what's going on with this movie? The band geeks should not be up here, right? Nothing against band geeks, of course. Sorry, let me jump ahead here because we've seen some of these. Yep, saw that here. Oppression's also institutional. So the idea here was that when women were trying to gain the right to vote, there were a lot of institutions that could have helped them to gain that right to vote, but those institutions did not do that because they were controlled by men, right? And women gaining the right to vote would be a threat to the power of men. And so lots of different social institutions like education and psychology, well, psychology is not an institution, but the scientific community, the religious community, the government, all of these things were kind of working against women gaining the right to vote, right? They were all saying the same thing, that women were, too fragile or too emotional, or couldn't handle the rigors of political life, or would get so interested in politics that they would abandon their families, and then, we'd have delinquent kids running around and it would be terrible, right? So they were all kind of projecting the same message, which was keeping women from voting, right? And again, because women didn't have any control of, or really any meaningful presence in any of these social institutions, they weren't able to use these institutions to help themselves, right? They needed to rely on men to give them some space or to move that issue forward, even though women were working very hard to spread the message, right? So women wouldn't have gained the right to vote without the efforts of women. I doubt men would have just done it on their own. But also women needed some men, right? They needed some allies to help them to do this, because again, they didn't have any institutional control. Yeah, no voice, right? And then finally, sorry, we've seen all these before. And finally, we said that oppression was cultural, right? And so a lot of our ideas about what men are and what women are and what sort of qualities we attribute to those genders, those are very deeply held ideas, right? And so to change them becomes, people are very resistant to changing them, right? And so again, people almost had there was almost a cultural clash, because women entering the political sphere meant that, they were less in the home, right? And the idea was that women belonged in the home, they belonged with family, they belonged with children, and so to take them out of there wasn't just a threat to power, but it was a cultural, it was what's the word I'm looking for here? It was a significant cultural change, right, that people were proposing, and people have a hard time often with cultural change because those beliefs are very deeply held, right? Yeah, and I guess the other thing that I mentioned here is that often the norms of society privilege the dominant groups, right? And so I made the example on Friday about Hillary Clinton, right? Where Hillary had to do a tricky thing when she was trying to get elected president of the United States. She was trying to get elected to an office that was traditionally held by men, and so when we think of what a US president should be, we usually think of a man, usually an older man, and usually a white man, right? Because that's mostly what we've had. But then along comes Hillary Clinton, a woman. And so somehow she has to be both, right? She has to be masculine enough for people to take her seriously as president of the United States, but she can't be entirely masculine either, because people know she's a woman and they're expecting her to fulfill her gender role that way as well. And so she had to walk the very tricky line of trying to be both, right? Masculine enough to be president, yet feminine enough to still be seen as a woman and liked as a woman. And unfortunately, there were other things that went on with Hillary too, but I think she kind of failed at it to some degree. I think she wasn't able to do both in an effective way. And that's not a criticism of her. That's a criticism of the fact that she cannot be a woman and be taken seriously as president of the United States. And that's a socialization issue, and that's a socialization issue. That's not her. And again, when Donald Trump ran for president and currently is, he didn't have to worry about being feminine enough to be in that office, right? Which, thank God, because he is not. But he's in no way feminine. But he didn't have to worry about that, right? That wasn't a consideration that he had to take in mind. All he had to do was just be his idiotic self. I mean, all he had to do was be himself, right? And so Hillary had this extra burden, right? She had to try to be two things at once, whereas Donald Trump, or anyone who ran against her, any man that ran against her, wouldn't have had to worry about that, right? So that's a cultural thing too. We said that, of course, when women did gain the right to vote, there was an element of privilege here because really it was only white women, right? Women of color, indigenous women had to wait much, much longer. And so it's often we tell the story that women gained the right to vote in 1917. Yay, go girls. And again, that is the story. But we should also remember that not all women gained the right to vote at that point. And there were other women who had to work hard for decades after in order to get the same rights and freedoms that white women gained in 1917 and men always had and didn't have to work for, right? And didn't have to fight for. Yes. Okay. On Friday, I think we read this very short article, and we said that there were 3 major things that made sexism difficult to see. And do you remember what they were? 3 things? No?
Just like society focuses on themselves. Something like that.
You're partway there.
Yeah.
Society focuses on individual events. Yeah, society looks at sort of very clear evidence of violence against women, and then it makes it much more difficult to see the sort of irregular, everyday sexism that exists in society, right? So you look at this horrible thing that's happened to women, and so I think I had an example here of, just one of many stories, unfortunately, that you can find where violence occurs against women, and it's very easy to sort of read that story and then look around and say, oh, things are pretty good around here, right? And to some degree, you're correct, right? No horrible acts of violence against women are happening right here, but it doesn't mean that sexism doesn't exist, right? So again, mainstream culture positions sexism as something extreme, right? Something that's very clear and very obvious, and those things are true and awful, but it doesn't mean that there's no sexism to be seen elsewhere, right? What was the second one?
Messages, social messages, gender roles ingrained into children since they are really young. Toys, advertisements.
Yeah, the sort of sexism and sexist messages are being transmitted to us all the time through all kinds of media, right? And so, again, it makes it harder to see sexism when the corporate world normalizes it all the time, right? And so, again, if you're presented with the same message over and over and over and over again, it becomes very difficult not to believe it, right? Or at least to notice that something is wrong, right? And so we said, yeah, we have lots of toys that transmit some sexist messages, and we saw this slide before, and whoops, I had another one. Yeah, we saw this slide before, we saw this slide before as well. But of course, the sexist messaging isn't just restricted to kids, it's restricted to adults, right? And so I didn't show you this one before, but what kind of messages are we receiving about what men are like from these 2 ads?
They must be jacked.
You must, yeah, if you want to be a real, it says right there, for real men. If you want to be a real man, you have to be jacked like that guy there, right? What else?
Must have girls.
Must what?
Must have girls.
Oh yeah, so there's a beautiful woman here. What else what other messages are going on in either one of these?
Maybe sportswear, Under Armour.
Right? So okay, what about Under Armour?
Because it's like a sportswear, men things that they're sporty.
Yeah, men should be sporty, right? Men should be athletic, and both of those guys are jacked, right? Look at the abs on that guy, on the mountain, on the climbing guy.
They act.
Man, that is tough to do. What other messages are we seeing here?
Men need high protein.
Oh yeah, men need to eat protein. No fat, high protein. Also, don't drink that stuff. That stuff is garbage. What's that? Strength, yeah. But how do we know that both of these guys are strong? Yeah, they're very muscly, And what's this guy doing here in the milk ad?
He's balancing with one hand.
Yeah, he's like hanging off a cliff with one hand. What does he think he is? Tom Cruise?
That's unreal.
What's that?
Unrealistic.
That's not very realistic, right? Well, maybe it's somewhat realistic. You probably wouldn't be drinking milk while you're doing that, but if you're a climber, you might do that for a split second while you change your handholds or whatever. What else is going on here in terms of messaging?
The women are there satisfied.
Ooh, good one. Yeah, so women maybe exist to satisfy men, right? So not so much in the milk ad, but in the Under Armour ad, she's sitting there, kind of sexily posed in bed, right? And
Kind of comes back to the whole thing how like men can be girls
yeah, is that how is that message showing up in this Under Armour ad?
because he's like the girls and men and he's just like out and
He
like
makes
going
it
out and
cool.
he's like okay and then
He's like, peace out.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, right. So not only is the woman here, so here we've got two models, right? So we've got this, nice muscular guy, and there's this, attractive woman in bed. But is he like, cuddling her in bed, like, oh, I love you, dear? No, he's like, peace out. Thanks for the fun time. I'm out of here, right? So almost that player alpha promiscuousness is right there in the ad, right? But again, there's nothing awful is going on here, but it's almost hard to see, right? Because if you've absorbed these social messages, you almost don't even notice it, right? You almost look at it and you're like, yeah, okay, Under Armour. But at the same time, you've absorbed these messages and they don't stick with you sometimes because you're just so used to seeing it, right? You're just so used to thinking that.
For the benefit of
Huh?
man. She's like for the benefit of man.
Oh yeah, I guess you can't see because of my head, right? Sorry, whoops. For the benefit of mankind. He's not, Sabrina, he's not a player. He's doing this for the good of the species. Oh,
I'm sorry.
see, he's a good guy, right? Right. And you thought he was just a player. Oh,
my bad.
awful. He's really just in it for the species. Okay. Right. Ridiculous, right? Ridiculous stuff. Anything else? I guess maybe men do dangerous things as well, right? Things that are risky, dangerous, brave. Those things are there too, right? Because he's not the Under Armour. There's nothing brave going on in Under Armour. What?
Real man.
Yeah, he's a real man, right? So doing things that are risky and dangerous and brave, all while looking muscular and jacked, but not being too concerned either, right? Is that guy, hey George, is that guy concerned that he's hanging off a cliff?
Nope, he's just drinking the milk.
I know, he's so cool, he's like, I'm just gonna stop and refresh, Ridiculous. Messages here, what kind of messages are we receiving?
Weight loss.
Hmm?
Weight loss collection.
It's like kind of a thing where in the Western culture, when it comes to summer, girls are supposed to like have their beach body, like their summer bod or whatever.
Mm.
And like that girl with the bikini, like she's showing off how like she's like thin, and then she has like her bikini on, and that means like she's already like ready for summer, and that's her beach body.
Right. So yeah, so there's a couple things here, right? There's a focus on women's appearance, right? And in terms of if it's the summer that they should be wearing swimsuits like this, but you might not be ready for summer, right? You might not be ready to dress like this. And so you have to do a lot of work, right? You have to lose a lot of weight in order to present yourself for a society's approval in the summer. I don't know. Am I going too far with that one?
It's kind of like that, but it kind of falls under that category because it makes like it kind of holds a expectation for women to have that body during summer when it's like for food,
Right. And that's not an easy body to have, right? You have to have the build for it, and she's built pretty slim, right? This is a pretty slimly built woman. Not all women are built exactly like this. And so, again, it sets up one size for which, women either have to fit in to be beautiful, or I don't know what, they cannot be seen in summer. Like, do not show yourself in summer if you don't look like this. I don't know. Maybe I might be going a little too far with this one, but it does set up an expectation for what women are supposed to look like, right? And again, not every woman can look like this, right? Just like not every man can look like either of those guys. In fact, I'm pretty sure I can't look like either of those guys. What else do I have? Oh, these are great. Right. Is this even real? I'm not entirely sure this one is real. I found it on the internet, but I don't know if it's a real one. But anyway, what's the message here? They should clean like Mr. Clean. So what's the job that really matters that mom has to get back to?
Cleaning the house.
Cleaning the house.
Women are supposed to be at home.
Right, she's supposed to be at home. It's kind of not clear, actually, right? Like, is getting back to the job that really matters? Is it cleaning, or is it being a mother to her little girl?
It says Mr. Clean.
It says Mr. Clean. It's an ad for Mr. Clean products.
Is that what it
And
is?
she is cleaning.
She is cleaning.
Is that what it is? It's like she's teaching the child.
And she's teaching her daughter how to clean. That's good.
That's just, it's mostly telling women to go back to hey, you don't do like loose work jobs and stuff like that. Just go clean the house.
Yeah. Or maybe Mr. Clean will help you clean the house faster, so then you can get back to the job that really matters, which is taking care of the kids. Right? I don't know where the husband is in this. Maybe the husband can clean the house on Father's Day, or on Mother's Day, sorry. I don't know. But either way, women have to do both, right? So we've got both of their jobs here, the sort of domestic house care job and the child rearing job. And there's no challenging of either of those, right? So Mr. Clean will help you clean the whole house so that you can get back to looking after the children, which is your real job. Or if you read it the wrong way, it seems like cleaning the house is your real job. Either way, whether you interpret this correctly or not, none of it's good, right? It's a very sexist message. What about this one? This one is real. This one is real. It insinuates that women can't think.
Yeah. They're saying like if you want to work in a real job, you have to think like a man.
Oh. Yeah, if you wanna work in a real job like an office job, if you want to be taken seriously, you've got to think like a man, right? And that's a perfect example where, you remember I said a little bit earlier, and I had it in the slide, where societal norms privilege men or privilege the dominant group. That's exactly what's happening here. What's what? What's BIC? What's big? Yeah, stationery. Yeah, they make pens and pencils. Yeah. In fact, I'm sure somebody has a Bic pen or pencil probably in this very room. I think. Yeah, that blue one is, isn't it?
Is it?
I think so. Is it?
No,
No,
it's
maybe
a
not.
nice one. No, it's with a traditional, the big one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But they're very popular. Bic is very popular. But this was a real ad, and it was put out on, I think they put it out on Women's Day, on International Women's Day. But again, it's funny. It's not funny, but it's funny because it's a sexist message, right? They're trying to say, "Yay, International Women's Day," but they've used a sexist message to say
I
it.
don't think they intended to.
No, they definitely didn't intend to. It wasn't on purpose. They clearly made a mistake, but they made a mistake because they weren't very aware, right, of what they were saying. They weren't very aware of stereotypes. And do you think women created this ad or men? Probably, right? Because there's a pretty big blind spot in this ad that we picked up on very quickly, right? Oh, so in order to be successful in the world of work, you have to think like a man. If you're a woman, that's just not going to cut it, right? No good. What was the third one? The third thing.
Western culture thinks that they're superior to others.
Right. So there's this idea of kind of the civilized versus the uncivilized world, and
It's a very daily life.
and what about our daily lives?
I think like the third one was sexism within the daily life.
I don't know. I kind of thought the third one was that the civilized versus the uncivilized world, because I had this, and it was the.
That's after.
Oh, that's after.
Yeah.
Wh-
Because
wh-
here it says third, the sexism within our daily lives. It's extremely West as civilized.
Okay. Yeah, so that's true. So I guess it's comparing the daily lives of different people in different cultures or different countries, right? And so the idea is that the West might be very tempted, well, not even tempted, they do this, but the West might be tempted to look at countries or cultures where this is the norm, right? And Western people might say, "Oh, wow, that's sexist right there. There's your sexism." And then, of course, when we look around in Canada, we don't often see that, and so we think, "Oh, we must not have any sexism," right? That's sexism there, over there, that's sexism, but here we don't have it, right? And again, I think both of, is this sexism? To some degree, it depends on who's looking. I don't want to be too controversial here, but I think it probably is evidence of sexism. But my point is that whether it is or isn't, it doesn't mean that there's none here as well, right? So it's very tempting to look at other countries and say, oh, that's so horrible. We don't have that here. We're all good, right? But that's not the case, right? It's some Canadians like to do this as well. They like to look at the United States and say, boy, those guys have some problem with racism down there. Thank God we don't have that here. But of course we do, right? Perhaps we don't quite have it to the level of severity or the pot is not boiling over at the moment, but we still have racism in Canada, right? It's very clearly here. So it's tempting often to look at maybe a situation that might be a little more worse or a little bit more visible and say, oh, there's that thing, there's racism or sexism over there, but we're okay here, right? And again, not usually the case, right? We do have sexism in Canada. What was my other? I think there's two other questions here. Oh yeah, the idea. Okay, I did that. Oh yeah, and the last one was that I asked you was, did the BBC documentary we watched, did it do this? Was it guilty of looking for, of feeling like, did it suggest that there was more sexism going on in maybe Jordan and Lesotho than there was in maybe Iceland or the UK? Yeah?
Like how men wasn't allowed to go out with like their friends and stuff.
Especially the one that she chooses herself. She can't like play sports and stuff. But if you see the little girl in Ireland where she can go home around like 12 with all of her like girlfriends.
Mhm.
She's like playing billiards. I mean, usually playing billiards, not really like girls sport.
Right. So it's certainly possible, right? It seems that the level of freedom that some of these girls had was different. It also might be a safety thing too, right? I think Iceland's a pretty safe country. I don't know. I don't actually have any conception about how safe or unsafe Jordan is.
And it's also the culture because I think in some Middle Eastern cultures, like women aren't allowed example, like, it's my house and I wanted to go to Starbucks to just get a drink, I have to wait until a man, like, brings me there.
Yeah. So yeah, in some countries and cultures, women are not really allowed to move freely on their own, right? Sometimes depending on their marital status, and sometimes just as a rule, right? And so they need men to escort them various places, whether it's a father or a brother or a husband, right? So there are kind of different customs and different levels of freedom around the world. I don't know. I guess did the BBC documentary treat these four cultures and these four girls equally and fairly? Like, did he kind of look for the sexism that he could find, and then sort of present it to us, or did he?
I don't know, it's different cultures, so I guess he was also pushing what he has been socialized to understand on them.
Mhm.
Like, oh, look, sexism.
Yeah.
But he did it with the Iceland too. Like he pointed out that there was sexism too. Like she was talking to her mother in the coffee shop, so they were
Mhm.
discussing it. So.
Yeah, it's true, and I almost think both are true, right? Like I think he was trying to find sexism wherever he could. I think he did have some preconceived ideas about maybe what these girls' lives would be like in Jordan or in Lesotho, and I think he was pushing for answers. And personally, I did find some of the answers were a little like I wasn't sure what they meant, right? And so like Mira's father Marwan said, "Oh, if you want to marry someone who I don't approve of, I won't support you in that decision." But my question was like, okay, but what does that mean, right? Does it mean he's going to like cut her off and like never speak to her again, or does it simply mean, I don't support this decision, but it's yours to make. So I really hope this works out. It's hard to know, right? So I think some answers were a little vague for me, and I would have been curious to know what they meant by them, but that's okay. It's worth thinking about whatever the answer to that question is. It's worth thinking about, right? Because again, documentaries are arguments, right? So when people put together a documentary, they're trying to make an argument to you, and they're trying to support that argument with evidence, right? With video evidence. And so we shouldn't treat documentaries as just a, you know, picture of reality. We should treat them as an argument, right? So whatever his name was, I forget his name, the presenter of the documentary is trying to tell you something about sexism, and he's trying to support that with evidence, right? So we should think about that when we're watching a documentary. What's the argument here? What are they trying to get us to believe? And should we believe it, right? Is the evidence, and are the evidence and premises enough for us to believe what's being sold to us, I guess. Yeah. So again, I don't exactly know the right answer to that, and I don't know that the answer matters, but it's worth thinking about. All right. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about gender equality, and I want to talk a little bit about statistics. But before that, I think we should take a break because statistics, right? So let's take a 10-minute break, then we'll come back and we'll deal with some of that stuff, okay? Jason.
No.
Talk to your parents. Okay, so we're back, people. I was going to talk a little bit about gender equality here. And so what we'll talk about here is actually the topic that came up, I think, on Thursday or Friday. Vera, do you remember the question that you asked?
Oh, was it the one about representation? How are you supposed to represent equity or equity versus equality?
Yeah. So Avera's original question had to do with how do you represent everybody equally in society? And so, because of course it's easy when you talk about women and men, right? So there's roughly 50% men and 50% women. And so in theory, your government institutions should roughly reflect that 50-50 mix, but we've seen, of course, that they do not. And so, but if you add other social groups into the mix, if you talk about race or religious affiliation or sexual orientation or economic or social class, if you mix in, or age, if you mix in all of these other social dynamics, how do you make sure that everybody is represented to the equal degree that they exist? And so we talked about the idea of equity versus equality, and sort of what we want is equity, right? We want people who need support to have it, people who don't need support, don't get extra support, so that everyone has equal access to resources and to opportunities and to the things, and to pursue the things that they want to pursue. But oftentimes it's difficult to guarantee that, right? Because we don't have control of everything in society, right? So here at Columbia College, we might want equity in hiring, right? We might not want to bias ourselves according to age or gender or sexuality or race or religion or any of that stuff. And we can take steps to do that, right? We can make sure that the college has good hiring practices that allow really the best candidate to come through regardless of the social groups they belong to. But we can't control what happens out in society, right? We don't control social messaging, we don't control how universities work, we don't control immigration, none of that stuff. So because we can't guarantee equity, because we can't guarantee perfect equality of opportunity, sometimes people go for equality of outcome, right? And so we might say that, well, there's 50% women in Canada, so we want 50% of our staff at Columbia College to be women. And we make sure that we hire in a way that that happens. Is it perfect equity? No. Is it 100% fair to everybody? Debatable, maybe not so much, right? I certainly wouldn't feel that it was fair to me if I got passed over for hiring and a woman got my job because she was qualified, but also because she was a woman, right? So is it entirely fair to all people all the time? No. So it can be a bit of a controversial kind of approach, but again, if you can't guarantee equity, if you can't guarantee equality of opportunity, maybe you can help out by working through some sort of system that is equality of outcome, where you get 50-50 or whatever you're looking for. But this is what we're talking about when, and I said gender equality here, but maybe equity is a better word. But this is what we ultimately want, right? We want equal rights and responsibilities and opportunities for people of all genders. And I know I've just been talking about men and women, but of course, as we talked about at the beginning of this course, the beginning of this unit, there are potentially more than two genders, right? Maybe three, maybe four, depends on the culture that you come from. And here in the West, I think we're still working out how many genders there actually are. There's 2+, right? So there's more than two apparently. But again, it doesn't mean that everybody gets treated the same, right? It means that people's rights and responsibilities and opportunities shouldn't depend on their gender. And sorry, what else have I written here? And this is an issue that is not just for women or not just for people who are gender non-binary. This is an issue that affects all of us, okay? So before I talk about this a little bit more, we're not doing that great here in Canada in terms of gender equality, I would say. We might like to pat ourselves on the back. Certainly lots of things in Canada are going really well for all Canadians and for women as well. So, you know, there are worse places to be than Canada if you are a woman, but there's still some work that we need to do. Things are not ideal by any means. Okay, so here you can see that Canada fell to 35th place in the global gender gap rankings. So there's 35 countries that are doing 34 countries that are doing a better job than we are at gender equality, right? So we've got some work to do. I mean, it's okay to pat yourself on the back a little bit and say, okay, Canada, things are not bad, but we can do better. And the question is that how do you see this inequality, right? How do you know it when it's happening? Because, sorry, I'll come back to that in a second. Because earlier on in the course, what I said that we should do, what I said that we should do is we should not look at individual cases, we should look at broader social patterns. And we watched that BBC documentary, and I think it was useful. It helped us talk about things, and it was nice to sort of talk to young women from different countries around the world, which actually is what we do in this class anyway, but that's okay. But I said that we wanted to look at broader social patterns, right? So one person's experience of sexism does not mean there's a societal problem, but you have to look at society as a whole. And so the question is, how do you do that? Well, you do it by looking at the numbers. You do it by looking at statistics that can represent all of society, right? So one person experiencing sexism, one person experiencing racism, or not experiencing either of those things, doesn't really tell you the story of what's happening in the society as a whole. You need the big numbers, right? You need the big data in order to do that. So just a couple things I wanted to point out about statistics if you didn't know them already. I'm not a statistician by any means. I've taken one statistics course in my entire life at university because I had to. But I took it, bless you.
And you almost failed.
What's that?
And you almost failed it.
It was pretty close. It was pretty close. Yeah, I wasn't really that interested in it. The prof that I had she kind of had a habit of, like, she would write, you know, it was like a math class, so she'd write on the board for the whole class. But she had a bad habit of like jumping around. And so she'd do like a little bit here, and then she'd do something over there, and then she'd go up, and then she'd go down. And so like if you were copying the notes, and then you looked up and she had moved, you're like, oh God, where did she come from? Because the thing that she did before wasn't right next to it, it was somewhere else. And so, yeah, I was really lost in the class. I got through, but it was close. It was close, but I needed it for my degree, so I took it. I did a lot more with statistics in my master's program, so I got a bit of a second dose of it. But here, all I'm going to talk about is just a few things that we should pay attention to when we're looking at numbers, okay? So the first thing we should pay attention to with statistics and data is sample size, okay? So that's the number of pieces of data in your sample, right? So here, I don't know if we have 19 students in the class. How many do we have here? Not that many. If we had 19 students in the class, and if I asked you if you like to eat fish, then my sample size is 19, right? So if there's 19 people in here and I say, hey, who likes to eat fish? Then I have a sample size of 19, okay? So let's see, I'm gonna ask you here, people in the room, who likes fish? Okay, hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, John, fish? Maybe? Okay, I'm gonna put you down as a no. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6? 6 fish people? 6 fish people, okay. So that's, and how many people do I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11, so I've got 6 of 11. So slightly more than 50%, maybe it's like 58% of this class likes to eat fish, okay? So do you think that that reflects Columbia College as a whole?
No.
You don't think 58% of Columbia College students like fish?
Not enough data.
Not enough data?
We're talking about people in the class, not as a college. We're
Right.
talking about one class.
Yeah, we're only talking about one class. And so, number one, the sample size is quite small, right? 11 people is a pretty small sample size, right? Anything could happen. Imagine, another way to think about this is if we had a final exam. We do not have a final exam in this class, just a paper. If we had a final exam in this class, how many questions would you like to be on it? One question? Oh man, you're brave, right? So if I give you a final exam with one question on it, what are the possible scores for final exams? 0 and 100, right? You either get the question right and you get 100 and an A, or you get it wrong and you get a 0 and you fail, right? So you're a brave man, number one. Number two, does that really tell me a lot about what you know? No, right? Because maybe you just got lucky on, that was the only thing you remembered from this entire class and you got 100%. And so really you know nothing, but you were just lucky. Or maybe you know everything in this class, but you're like, I'm blanking on this one thing, and then you get a 0, right? So one question doesn't tell me anything about what you know. But if I asked you 10 questions, would that be better?
Slightly.
That'd be a little bit better, right? So let's say it's you, King. And so let's say the real mark that you should get, okay? The real amount, let's say it's 75, okay? That's what you should get. So if I ask you 10 questions, what are the chances that you're going to get between 7 and 8 of them right? Well, better, right? That's better than just one question. And if I ask you, 100 questions, is there a good chance that you'll get probably about 75 of those right? Yeah. And if I ask you 1,000 questions, do you think you'll get about 750 of them right?
Yeah.
You'll be exhausted, but yeah. So the bigger the sample size is, the more accurate it becomes, right? And so again, if I ask you one question on the final exam, it's not accurate in any way, right? You could fluke out one way or the other and get a 0 or 100. If I ask you 10 questions, probably a little better. There's a much better chance that you'll get, a 70 or an 80%. Maybe you'll get a little bit lucky and get an extra question, or maybe you'll be unlucky. But the more questions I ask you, the more accurate things become. And so, yeah, here at Columbia College, it doesn't make sense to ask 11 people because we have 2,000 students, right? The sample size is too small. It's not reflective, right? The other thing you might want to mention here is that at Columbia College, most of our students are from India, and big chunks of those students are vegetarians. So are they going to like to eat fish? Probably not, right? So not only is the sample size too small, but it's not really representative of the people we have here. And if you're not asking our Indian students this question, you're not going to get a good result, right? Because most of our students come from this one part of the world. Most of them are vegetarians. Most of them don't eat fish, right? So, again, small sample sizes. I've got a lot of numbers here, but really what we're saying is that if you ask a really small selection of people, there's a good chance that the data that comes out of it, the numbers that come out of it, are not good enough to sort of extend to the greater population, right? Especially if that greater population is huge. So the 57% of people that like fish in this room, do you think that that's representative of the secondary program? All the students in the secondary program? No, but it probably has a better chance of being closer, right? Because there's about 100 students or so in the secondary program. So we've surveyed 10% of them, and we got 57. So that's pretty good. But if we expand to 2,000 students, might not be accurate. If we're talking about all of Vancouver, probably not, right? We need a bigger sample size. If it's too small, then again, you don't get an accurate reading of what's going on, right? And so, again, think about the final exam questions, the number of them. If there's too few, you don't get a really good measure of what students know. And the more you ask, the better measure you have. Although there is a point where you don't get any better data, right? Which is why I don't ask you 1,000 questions on final exams, right? Well, for other reasons too. Right, so I said all this stuff. The larger your population is, the larger your sample size has to be in order to be representative and accurate. So I'm just going to close this because these guys are noisy. They're just hanging out. Right, so the bigger your sample size is, or the bigger your population is, the bigger your sample size has to be. If you want to know how many people in Canada support Justin Trudeau, it's 36 million people in Canada. You can't ask 11 people, right? You can't even ask 1,100 people, right? So often surveys like that, they usually, I think they go between 3,000 and 5,000 people, which is still a little on the small side, but they make sure that they ask a sort of a diverse group of people, and they kind of do it that way. But you need a decent sample size. We talked about this a little bit on Thursday or Friday, I think, things being over or underrepresented, right? And so, again, if our class is roughly 50% guys and 50% girls, how many girls versus guys should get A's if we have a 50-50 mix in our class? And let's say there's 4 A's to go around. Yeah, right? So in theory, that's what should happen. Now, if 3 girls get A's, guys are underrepresented, right? Because in theory, it should be 50-50. More girls got A's, therefore guys are kind of underrepresented in the A student category. If it's the other way, if more guys get A's than girls, then girls are kind of underrepresented, right? There should be roughly 50-50, but it's not. You look just a little confused there. Huh? You're just curious?
No, just carry on.
Just carry on? While it's, the wheels are kind of turning? Okay. Right, so in theory, the sort of, the character of the sort of bigger population should be similar to a smaller one, right? And so, again, with the Government of Canada, because we have 50% women and 50% men in Canada, in theory, if all of the things are equal, then we should have 50% of the government should be women and 50% should be men. But of course, as we know, that is not the case. Women are underrepresented, right? There should be more of them. Their representation in government is under, it's below, right? So we should be seeing 50-50. Instead, we're seeing 75-25 or something like that. So women are actually pretty significantly underrepresented, right? And so again, sometimes that can tell us something as well, right? Especially if you're looking at an entire society, right? So in this class, let's go back to the A's. Let's say there's going to be 4 A's in this class, okay? And let's say we have a roughly 50-50 gender split, guys and girls. So in theory, 2 guys should get A's and 2 girls should get A's and 2 guys should get A's. Now, if all 4 A's go to girls, is that cause for alarm? Should I be concerned about that? I should? Why?
Why the boys so dumb?
Okay, I might be concerned about that. I might be concerned about why the boys are so dumb. But should I be concerned about that? Should I feel like, oh, something's wrong? No? Why not?
Because you're teaching everyone in the same class.
Okay, so I'm teaching.
The same way, it's not like you're like choosing there, you teach 2 women.
Hopefully not. There could be some unconscious bias that I'm not aware of. But it's true. So this is just one class. In theory, everyone is getting the same instruction. And the other thing is this is a small sample size, right? So it's not going to be perfectly accurate, right? So again, if in this class, if there's supposed to be 4 A's and 3 girls get the A's and only 1 guy gets an A, that's not cause for me to panic, right? Because it's a small group. Things aren't going to even out perfectly. But if that pattern was applied to the entire school, so let's say I looked at all the grades in Columbia College for an entire year, and I found out that girls were getting 75% of the A's in all the classes over a whole year, are there some questions that should be asked? Yeah, like what is going on, right? Why are we not seeing relative equality in this way? Because you would think you would, right? But with those kind of numbers, with 2,000 students taking, I don't know, 3, 4, maybe 5 courses per term over the whole year and all of their grades, you would think it would balance out, right? That's enough data to get roughly a 50-50 mix. And maybe it will be a little out. But again, if girls were getting 75% of the A's in the entire college, I think I would want to know why. I would want to know what is going on, right? Are our male students coming to us less prepared? Is there some sort of bias? Is there some way in which boys are disadvantaged and girls are not? I would be curious to know what's going on, right? Do you think this doesn't happen? But what if we lived in Canada where only male international students could work? Only male international students could have jobs. That would be a reason for the discrepancy, right? So I might see that 75% of girls are getting the A, or 75% of the A's at Columbia College are going to girls. I might be like, oh, that's interesting. And then maybe I find out that, oh, that's because girls aren't working. So they can devote all their time to their studies. Guys are allowed to work, and so they do, and so they have less time to devote to their schoolwork. Obviously, I'm making all of this up, but that could be a reason, right? But again, when certain groups are markedly underrepresented or overrepresented, red flag, right? A question needs to be asked, right? Something might be wrong, right? So again, small sample sizes can be inaccurate, right? So what they measure can be kind of more outside of what the actual measurement is. And again, you can't apply them to big populations. You need a sample size that's kind of reflective, okay? So some of this is basically what I just said. All right. And the last thing to pay attention to, so there's sample size, there's over and under representation, and there's thinking about what the numbers will actually tell us, okay? And sometimes they're very enlightening, and sometimes they just kind of point out that something's going on here, right? So there might be something right, there might be something, going right, there might be something going wrong, or maybe there's no issue at all. But again, we have to pay attention to what the data is actually telling us, right? So here's an example here. If 70% of people believe in ghosts, ooh, it's a Halloween one, does that mean that ghosts exist? No. What does this statistic tell us? People just believe in it, right? So that is not evidence that ghosts exist. That's just evidence that people believe in them, right? And so again, pay attention to those stats too, because sometimes you'll see opinion polls, right? And so you'll get a measure of people's opinion, you'll get a measure of what people think, but just because people think it doesn't mean it's true or accurate or even that, it's what they truly believe, right? So it's important to keep in mind what the numbers are actually telling you. Also pay attention to the numbers and percentages that people, or that statistics will use. So as you can see here, about 600 people were murdered in Canada in 2016, okay? which sounds like a lot, right? But there's 35 million people in Canada, and so that means the murder rate here is 1.68 per 100,000, which is usually how they express murder rates per 100,000 people. But in the US, if you look, 17,000 people were killed in 2016, which sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but they have way more people, right? And so you have to express it with the same denominator, right? You have to express it per 100,000 people. As it turns out here, it actually is way more, right? But again, you don't know that unless you can compare things with the same denominator, right? With the same number. So again, 600 sounds like a lot, 17,000 sounds like way more, and it is, but you have to put it in context of their population. But in this case, even when you do, you see that the US is a much more murdery place than Canada is, right? Yeah, also pay attention to any assumptions that you might make about the meaning of the data. Again, stats show us patterns, but they don't say why, right? They usually just tell us what, right? What is happening here? What are the outcomes here? Who is more represented in government? So we can say that the murder rate in the US is much higher than in Canada, but it doesn't say why that is, right? Is US culture just more violent in general? Is it because everybody seems to have a gun in the United States? You know, is law enforcement weaker in the United States? The stat doesn't tell us, right? It just tells us that there's a difference, and then we have to do the work, right? We have to figure out why that is. Yeah, so those are the three things I want you to kind of remember is pay attention to sample size, pay attention to which groups are over and underrepresented, and when you see groups that are over or underrepresented, usually that's a little flag to say, hey, what's going on here, right? If 75% of the A's at Columbia College go to female students, little flag, what's going on there, right? You would really expect it to be close to 50-50, especially if you took into account all of our students over an entire year, over all of their classes. You would expect roughly 50-50, right? Actually, to be honest, I would expect the girls still to be a little bit higher, but 75% is really high, right? So I would be curious to know what's going on. And maybe nothing is wrong, but maybe something is, right? So pay attention to that. And then again, pay attention to what the data is actually saying. And so remember the ghost example, 70% of people believing in ghosts doesn't mean that ghosts exist. It just means that that's what people believe, right? Okay, right. So knowing that, I'll talk just a little bit about gender equality and then I'll let you go, okay? So I said that we're not doing very well in terms of gender equality here in Canada, right? Even though Canada seems like a great place, it seems like a great place for women, and I would argue that overall it is, but we still have a lot of work to do. And you can see these in terms of some of the statistics that have to do with gender-based violence, sexual assault and harassment, the gender wage gap, and I think that last one should be barriers girls face. It shouldn't just be girls face. Sorry, that's a typo. Barriers that girls face, not their faces. That's a bad. I'm gonna fix that. That's a bad typo. Yeah, barriers girls face. That's what that should say. Yikes. Okay. Gender-based violence. So women and girls in Canada have a heightened risk of violence, and often it's at the hands of someone that they know. So whether it's their fathers or brothers or friends or boyfriends or husbands, and yeah, usually women are subjected to violence by men, right? And so that can be just kind of regular assault, it can be sexual assault, it can be cyber violence and cyberbullying, it can be all of these things. And so here's some numbers for you. Half of all the women in Canada have experienced at least one incident of physical or sexual violence since the age of 16. That is a shocking shocking statistic, is it not?
Yeah, I'm kind of shocked about that.
Yeah, that's shocking because half is a lot, right? Especially when you're talking about all of the women in Canada, right? So all of the women in Canada are probably, I don't know, 16 million, nope, 15, 16, 17, 18 million people. And over half of them have experienced at least one incident of physical or sexual violence. That is a shocking number of people to be exposed to that, right? Ridiculous. 67% of Canadians have said they personally have known at least one woman who has experienced physical or sexual abuse, right? So again, that's huge. 67% of Canadians is a lot, especially when many women don't really want to tell a bunch of people that they have been a victim of physical or sexual violence, right? So often if something like this happens, it will not be reported. And so the fact that 67% of Canadians say that they know someone means that there are more, right? There's just some women haven't come forward. Yeah, approximately every 6 days, a woman in Canada is killed by her intimate partner.
Husband?
Yeah, husband, boyfriend, common law husband. Yeah. Shocking, right? That is a lot of violence, right? Yeah, and out of 83 police reported intimate partner homicides in 2014, 67% of the victims, 80% were women, right? So if you have two people who are in an intimate relationship, a husband or wife or boyfriend and girlfriend, and one kills the other, it's 80% of the time it's the man, right? The man kills his wife or girlfriend, right? So that's a pretty big overrepresentation in terms of women, right? That's not an equal situation. Yeah, on any given night in Canada, about 3,500 women and 2,700 children sleep in shelters because it's not safe for them to go home, right? They live with a man who is violent or abusive or using substances or alcohol, and it's not safe for them to go home, right? Here, women reported 500,000 sexual assaults in 2014, according to Statistics Canada. And again, keep in mind that a lot of women do not report these, right? Because they're painful and embarrassing, and they might fear that the man will hurt them somehow if they report it. And so that's a low number, right? That's not all of them. There's a lot that don't make it into the statistics, and that's a lot of women, right? Yeah, women are 10 times more likely than men to be victims of a police-reported sexual assault. Although both men and women experience sexual assault, women accounted for 92% of the victims of police-reported sexual assault. So if you have a sexual assault, it is almost always perpetrated against a woman. Now, that number is probably a little bit lower because sexual assault doesn't happen to men very often, but when it does, men are often very reluctant to report it, especially if it's another man who sexually assaults them. And so those are if sexual assaults in general are underreported, for when it happens against a man, they are very underreported, right? So again, it does happen, but they usually don't make it into the statistics because men will often not report it. But still, 92% is wildly high, right? Sexual assault's the only violent crime in Canada that's not declining. So murders, for the most part, continue to decrease year after year, and violent robberies and violent assaults and things like that. But sexual assault is not going down. All other crimes are going down except for this one. Interesting. Yeah, and in fact, sexual assault reported by intimate partners is actually going up. And so Yeah, that's disturbing too. I don't know. I don't have anything to say about that. Sexual assault's more likely to occur with younger women in Canada, right? So the rate of sexual assault is 18 times higher for Canadians aged 15 to 24. So there's an age-related thing going on here as well, right? But again, you can see some of the numbers are concerning, right? Because it's not, it's not 55% or it's not like 1.2 times. It's like 18 times, and it's like 80 and 90%, right? And so you can pretty clearly see how all of these types of violence, whether it's a homicide or whether it's a physical assault or a sexual assault, women are much more likely to be the victims than the perpetrator, right? Yeah. You can also see that there's a race or ethnicity element to this as well. So sexual assault, account for 33% of all crimes committed against Aboriginal women. So if something happens to you that's against the law and you're an Aboriginal woman, it's 1 time out of 3, it's a sexual assault, right? And 10% of all crimes committed against non-Aboriginal women. So Aboriginal women have sexual assault happen to them far more frequently than non-Indigenous women, right? Yeah, if you are disabled in some way, you are more likely to be sexually assaulted, right? Yeah, and the total number of seniors who are sexually assaulted by family members, 96% are women. So again, these things disproportionately affect women to a significant degree, right? Not 55% or 58%, but numbers like 96%. Here we go, barriers girls face. Some of the barriers that people in general face and that is kind of getting more media attention now are mental health issues. And thankfully that is happening. Again, here in the West, we've been very good at treating physical illness, but mental illness we haven't done a very good job treating. There's still a negative stigma, right? And so again, if you tell someone that you have cancer, people are like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, what can I do for you? And they might hug you and things like that. But if you tell someone you have a mental health issue, people act slightly differently sometimes, right? They get a little uncomfortable, they're not sure, and it's because we have a negative stigma in the West anyway attached to mental health, and that is not there for physical health issues. And so, but again, in Canada, for women being in the minoritized group, mental health issues disproportionately affect them as well, right? So in grade 6, 36% of girls say they're self-confident, but by grade 10, this has plummeted to 14%, right? So, middle school and high school is a tough time for everyone to some degree, but definitely for girls, right? What's that? What do we mean by self-confidence? Confident about yourself?
Believing in yourself.
What's that?
Loving and believing.
Loving and believing in yourself.
I mean, like, believing in yourself, like, are you, like, self-confident about their looks, or, like,
It can be a lot of different things. It can be looks, it can be behavior, it can be your ability to make friends, or your ability to feel strong enough to, I don't know, deal with bullies or deal with an exam or stressful situations, all of those things, right? But girls by grade 10 often don't feel very confident in themselves, right? And boys as well, but girls are more vulnerable in this way. Yeah, between 9 and 13, girls are becoming less confident and are more likely to report feeling depressed, right? And 12% of girls have experienced a major depressive episode at some point in their life, right? So we're seeing an increase in some of these situations with young people in general, but again, girls are disproportionately affected, right? They're a minoritized group. There's a lot of pressure on their appearance, and it's a stressful time of life anyway. Yeah, more girls aged 10 to 17 are hospitalized for mental disorders than boys of the same age. And again, it doesn't mean that boys aren't experiencing these things. So it could have to do with with differences in boys and girls' development. It could have to do with girls' ability to maybe reach out and ask for and get help versus men's likelihood not to reach out and ask for help. It can have to do with kind of definitions of mental health in general, right? And maybe some of those definitions privilege men, and so they don't get diagnosed or they don't get help, whereas women or young girls here wind up in the hospital. And again, you could argue that actually that might not be a bad thing, right? Is that if you do need to be hospitalized, then you are, right? Whereas men might not be. And maybe it would be good for them to be hospitalized, but that's a complicated thing. I don't want to go through all of these in too much detail here, but girls are far more likely to have an eating disorder, right? And we've talked about already how social messaging puts a lot of pressure on women's appearance, in particular women's bodies, and looking a certain way, right? Looking very slim. And so, yeah, girls are much more likely to have an eating disorder than boys are. Incidences of self-harm seem to be increasing all the time, right? And there's reasons for that as well. And again, suicide is the third leading cause of death for girls aged, it's behind the thing, 10 to 14. And the second leading cause of death for girls aged 15 to 19. So there's a lot of things to be concerned about here, right? There's a lot of numbers that are concerning. And again, some of these affect boys as well, but disproportionately so for girls, right? And there's a lot of different pressures on girls, and they show up in these numbers, right? Before I get onto that, does anyone have any questions about those things, about gender-based violence, or about some of the, I guess, in terms of barriers, I guess we're talking about mental health challenges. Does anyone have any questions about those, or things that you just want to say? No. How many people? I don't have the not surprisingly, I don't have the statistic right on the tip of my tongue. You can find that number. Often suicides aren't reported in the newspaper or anything like that, the way murders are, and so sometimes it's hard to get a sense of how often they happen. Sadly, they're more frequent than you might think, especially because you never read it in the newspaper, but then when you see the numbers, let me just look.
Guys are more likely to diagnose themselves than girls.
That is true. As far as I know, and I don't, Gordon would be the one to ask on this because he has a lot of experience with suicide counseling, but girls are more likely to attempt, right? But guys are more likely to succeed. So what it says here, I'm just Googling it really quickly, and it says, according to the latest available data, Statistics Canada estimates 4,157 suicides took place in Canada in 2017, making it the 9th leading cause of death, in between Alzheimer's, which is 8th, and cirrhosis and other liver diseases in 10th. In 2009, there were 3,800 suicide deaths. So they've, it's hard to tell if it's increased slightly or not because our population has increased. Well, this is the thing. You have to look at the data, but But keep in mind, our murder rate was 600 people for an entire year. And we're losing, I don't know, 5 times that, 6 times that in suicides. So it's much more likely that somebody's going to die as a result of suicide than as a result of being murdered, right? Okay, that was a really dark way to end this class. Okay, so as a positive spin on all of this, we'll talk a little bit about gender pay gap tomorrow, and then I think we'll finish off sexism so that we can get into racism, because I think we're about done with sexism, right? Is there anything more that we need to say? Probably not very much, at least for this class. Okay, so that is all, good people. Wrap it up and pack it up, and I'll see you tomorrow, where we'll have Tuesday instead of Monday. Okay, bye people.